Brothers and sisters, today I was musing on the bread of life and the whole motif of the manna in the Old Testament. The scriptures are in the most sort of mysterious way, in the way that God prepares through the people of God and through the whole experience of Israel in the Old Testament, a series of prefigurements, of foreshadowings, of things that point to realities to come. And the scriptures are really moving in the direction from this foreshadowing to the fulfillment, that Christ will come to fill and fulfill everything that was beforehand. So everything is pointing to him and to his creation. And so Christ is the fulfillment of all the Old Testament symbols and the rituals and you could say the motifs. They point to him, and he gives it its ultimate reality. What do I mean? Well, let's look at the Eucharist in terms of the manna. In fact, it's so interesting that when Jesus in John 6 in the Bread of Life discourse, when he gives his whole teaching about the Eucharist and about the bread of life, and he says that the bread of life is him. He's the bread that has come down from heaven to give us life. You know, he gives this in the context of the manna. You know, he even says that, well, your ancestors ate of the manna in the desert that Moses gave them and they died. But I, will give you the manna, the new manna, the bread of life, and that is me, and then he gives this whole teaching, unless you eat of me, which is this amazing teaching that is just so revolutionary. And so many of the disciples stopped following Christ after this teaching. But if we were to go back to the manna of the Old Testament, and we read about it in Exodus, and we come again, it's in Deuteronomy, it's mentioned in Nehemiah, we see it as well in Wisdom 16 and in Psalm 78. It speaks about this bread coming from heaven, and it gives it the title, this food of angels, the bread of angels. So what do we understand by the manna coming down from heaven as food of the angels? Well, first of all, just to say, what does the word manna actually mean? St. Thomas Aquinas, when he comments on the John's Gospel on John 6, he makes this reference to the fact that the Jews called it manna because manna means, what is it? What is it? They actually did not know what it was, because there was no reference to the manna in anything the Israelites had known or seen before. This was something completely out of their ordinary experience. And so they called it manna, manu in the Hebrew. What is it? And so St. Thomas says it's the same thing for the incarnation. We could prolong that question. What is it? What is the incarnation? This is incredible, that God will become human. What is the Eucharist? That Jesus is there, body, blood, soul, and divinity. What is it? So he sees a foreshadowing of the manna, the what is this, fulfilled, ultimately pointing to the Eucharist. And so the manna is a type, it's a sign of something much greater to come. For us Christians is with the new bread that has come from heaven, Jesus in the Eucharist. And so the manna. So what is the manna? And so it's very interesting that for the Old Testament, they clearly understood the manna as something supernatural, because the Wisdom 16, the book of wisdom, which, the scriptures help us to read the scriptures, and Wisdom 16 points to the manna and basically says it's a bread. They call it bread because it, what else to call it? Because it's bread in the sense that it gave them life in the middle of the desert when they had left Egypt, and they were complaining and murmuring, and yet, despite them murmuring, God gave them bread from heaven. He was merciful to them. He gave them this supernatural substance, and it's supernatural because, as Book of Wisdom says that, and in the other parts of the scripture, it fulfilled every pleasure. So anybody who ate that manna in the desert, it was like it conformed to their likes and tastes. They were able to receive it according to their taste. So this is not a miracle that happens in their perception of the manna. It's rather a miracle that takes place in the actual manna itself. And so the manna is this supernatural substance. Coming back to the whole thing about bread of angels, well, that was a title to give to the manna to point that this manna came from the realm of angels, something supernatural, something heavenly. And the much deeper connotation there of the bread of angels is to say that, well, angels have no body, so what is their bread? What do they eat? And St. Thomas Aquinas who said, well, spiritually they eat Christ, they eat in heaven, they see Christ, they see God, basically. They see the wisdom of God, they eat the wisdom of God, that's their vision. They're sustained by the vision of God. That vision of God is actually so life-giving to them that it sustains them. And so the bread that the angels eat is God himself in his unadulterated vision, his pure essence that they see.